She's April.
And she's Molly.
We are
the Book Besties. Marriage is a young man's disaster and an old man's comfort.
I feel like I am not smart enough for this book. My ovaries make it hard for me to think. Did you know that?
It's like, shocking twist, they actually don't. I don't know if you knew that. They actually have magical powers.
No, you are literally giving me anxiety right now. I can't.
Really? In the 1950s, you thought our biggest villain in the future is going to be bugs?
It's the army, too, so he needs to be able to count to at least 30 to, count his platoon, right?
WTF is with all this math? Another day, another dollar, am I right?
We're not making dollars on this, Molly.
I mean, it was a metaphor.
No
Anyways,
dollars.
Season 2, Episode 2, and we're back with our new bestie, Isaac.
Right.
Yeah,
after a whole 10-minute break between our recordings.
Yeah.
Don't give away the secrets of the sauce.
Isaac. Trade secret.
We actually record the whole year on one day. Just binge recording.
We all read 72 books, and we are just sitting here.
Right? Coffee, good to go.
So Isaac, before April joined us, Isaac was telling me about his current project, and I need...
Yeah, so actually
April
during our little 10-minute break, had to go downstairs because I just built a tide pool in the basement and needed to check on the tide pool.
Real life tide pool, April.
It's the coolest thing. So used a big stock tank, put rock and sand in there, filled it with seawater, little pumps to circulate the water. Now we're putting crabs, shrimp. I actually found a starfish.
Now, do you plan to eat the crabs and shrimp, or you just have them in there
it's
for
just
pets?
just as pets. Because
no.
When you go to the beach and you find tide pools and you can just stare into the tide pool for hours, watching the little critters do their little critter things. So we live in Wyoming. We don't have tide pools, so I built one.
Yeah. So I feel like something you need to know about me, Isaac, is that I don't swim where things live, and I don't like fish. I like to eat fish, but last episode I mentioned that my husband built this koi pond without telling me, and I am terrified of big fish. Do you know how big koi get?
Yes.
A tide pool in our basement sounds horrifying to me. Sounds horrifying to me.
Well, they grow based off their container,
koi
right?
Koi are actually magical fish. I don't know if
we got them when they were this big.
Powers.
We got them when they were this big because they're cheaper when they're smaller, and now they're already this big, and I can't. I can't with it.
They'll get 3 feet long and weigh 40 pounds.
No, you are literally giving me anxiety right now. I can't.
Anyway, so this week we are covering
Starship Troopers,
which Isaac is actually leading.
Yeah. So this is going to be a little break from what we normally do because Isaac is going to be
this is one of your favorite books, right, Isaac?
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite books. Despite being sci-fi, I'm still one of my favorite books.
I feel like I read this book. I looked up stuff about it because I feel like I am not smart enough for this book. And I'm saying this now because I feel like there was a bunch of symbolism in there I missed, and I don't know. It just, some of it went over my head, I think. I don't know.
I do feel not to make big judgment calls. I do feel like Robert Heinlein is probably more intelligent than Ernest Cline. Just saying. Maybe not more intelligent, maybe just more intellectual. How's that?
I mean, well, it's a different time. This was written in what, the 1950s?
1950s. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in 1959. Yep, is when it was published. So do you want me to go ahead and do the synopsis, or do you guys want to talk
Listen to how he overpronounced it. Listen to how he overpronounced it.
We get it.
I got you,
we get it.
I got you.
We get it. We get it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So neither of you had read this before, right?
No.
Mm-mm.
This is not on my TBR. Okay. This was not.
Right, so part of the deal, we mentioned this in the last episode, part of the deal is you guys got to pick out a book for me, anything that was not Harry Potter, and I would agree to read that no matter how ridiculous it was. Picked a book that I really did enjoy, Ready Player One, And then I got to pick a book that I liked, and especially since you went sci-fi, well, arguably sci-fi. We talked about that in the last episode too. I went definitely sci-fi. Oh, it's reflecting. There we go. I'll hold it up so you can read it. Definitely sci-fi with Starship Troopers. So
I feel like we made a mistake. We should have made him read like Red, White, and Royal Blue. Or
Oh, definitely. You know what? We'll do a revisit in a couple of months and make him read something romance and trash.
I actually, you guys did an episode on that one, right?
Yeah, yes. We did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually listened to that one. It sounded interesting, but you did not convince me to read it.
A lot of spice.
I gathered that. And not like sci-fi spice from Dune. Like
No, but like
that book. That book is awful.
There's a whole subgenre of sci-fi that is complete like trashy romance sci-fi. Like it's more sex than it is sci-fi. That's a whole genre.
There's fantasy of that too, right? And like the trend on
Molly, there is dinosaur romance.
That's what I'm saying.
Like what in the world? Like a woman and a dinosaur.
Centaurs. Anyways, we're going to move on because we're taking over.
I think there are other words for that, but it's not romance.
It's like a shift changer. Like it's not
like shape shifting. Anyways, this is Isaac's episode.
You're not helping your cause.
Okay, whatever.
Hit us with the synopsis.
Sure. So
synopsis.
Right, the way that you say it sounds all snooty.
Explain
when
this
you're making fun
motherforking book to us.
You got it. So in the sci-fi world, anybody who's like a hardcore sci-fi fan has probably heard what's actually written like on the back of the book, which is, I wrote it down, hang on. So in one of Robert Heinlein's most controversial bestsellers, a recruit of the future goes through the toughest boot camp in the universe and into battle with the Terran mobile infantry against mankind's most frightening enemy. Sounds intriguing, right? So I did write up a little more synopsis for myself. Molly is laughing. I feel like you're laughing at me, not with me.
The most dangerous creatures, like they're bugs, man.
They're big bugs, though.
The bugs.
Big bugs. I have a whole runner about this, but we'll get to it.
Okay. So in all fairness, it didn't say most dangerous; it said most frightening. And I don't know about you, but the way that I react to like a spider in my basement, you make that thing like larger than human size. That's pretty frightening.
Says the
you don't have room in your basement. You have a tide pool.
Right, it keeps all the spiders away. So written in 1959 as a response to the U.S. suspending nuclear testing, this book addresses many social and political issues, including traditional militarism, suffrage, civic virtue, juvenile delinquency, corporal and capital punishment, just war theory, and international relations. As far as the storyline goes, Juan Johnny Rico graduates from high school and volunteers for federal service, i.e. joining the military. He ends up in the mobile infantry, goes through training, and deploys on several different troop transport ships with various infantry units to fight the bugs. The bugs are an intelligent arachnid species apparently bent on the total destruction of humanity. So that was my synopsis.
That's good. I like it better than his.
Thank you for your vote of confidence.
It was more clear.
Oh man.
So I know for both of you, this was your your first time reading the book. This is one of the few books that I've read more than once. I've read it quite a few times actually, and I feel like I've gotten something different from it each time that I've read it. I'm sure that'll come up later in the discussion too. But first impression, we talked before with Ready Player One how I was kind of initially turned off, but I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and read it. I'm not going to stop reading it, and I ended up liking the book. So first impression, love it or hate it, or somewhere in between, or a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
I'll go first. I struggled for the first chapter. I'm not going to lie. I text April and I'm like, oh my God. First and foremost, the narrator in the audiobook has an NPR voice. And this is and the first chapter is very like action filled, and you're just like nodding off as he's talking. So that was rough. But as you go on, I got a lot of the lingo because I was part of the service, and even though some of it is more of an old fashioned version of what we say in, you know, current military, I got the transition. I understand the whole storyline about brotherhood and military service, but honestly, I mean, I said this before we started recording. I feel like I wasn't smart enough for this book. I feel like this author has like all these underlining meanings, and there's all the symbolism, and I'm just not getting it. And I don't know.
So I gave it 2 stars out of 5, but I don't really give a lot of 5 stars, so this is not like, I mean,
it's
a hard thing to get 5 stars from me, but I gave it 2.
When I publish, I'm gonna get like 3 stars from her.
I don't even have to read Molly's book. I'll be like plugging it everywhere. Like, Molly gets 5 stars. Just read it.
And then she texts me, "Boo, you could have done better."
You underestimate me. No, so I read both the physical book and the audiobook. And I agree with Molly that the narrator for the audiobook was just not like, he didn't have the expressive, like, adventure sounding voice to like carry this kind of book. But I did find myself flagging a few quotes that I was like, dang, that was really deep in the middle of a sci-fi book, which was
It does
great.
have that, yeah.
Yeah, it does have a lot of deeper stuff, yes.
And like the first one happens pretty early in the book for me. In chapter 5, there are no dangerous weapons. There are only dangerous men. And I was like, dang. So for me, there were a lot of quotes, but this is the reason why I rated it 2. It's the opposite of what Molly said. For me, I don't have enough of the background information for the military. So I had to stop a lot and ask my husband, who's retired military, he's retired Coast Guard, like you two are Coast Guard, and ask him questions like, did this happen in boot camp? Are officers really allowed to hit people? Like, is that a thing? Like, I didn't know these things. I assumed that they weren't allowed, but, you know, I had to ask because I don't know these things. So for me, that's why it was on the lower end. But as I read the book, it went from, oh my gosh, I really do not want to read this book, to, hey, this isn't so terrible. I actually, in the end, it probably won't be one I reread, but like the quotes that I flagged are ones that I was like, yes, this made this book for me. Like, you know, it gets a 2. But listen, I've read books that I hated completely. So,
City of Girls, we're looking at you.
Oh my gosh,
so along those same lines, that was actually something that I really wanted to ask you, because you brought up the military thing and some of the military jargon and stuff like that.
Right.
And I know there are a lot of books out there. Some that come to mind would be like Robert Louis Stevenson, when he's writing like Treasure Island or Kidnapped, or, you know, anything happening on a ship. He uses all of this nautical jargon that, if you're not familiar with, could be confusing. And some authors use a lot of jargon, but they really make the effort to explain all of it as they introduce new terms. And part of the difficulty can be, if you are familiar with the jargon, you won't know whether or not the author is explaining it sufficiently for somebody who's not. So I think you kind of already answered it a little bit, but that was what I wanted to ask you was, did you feel lost with the jargon, or did he do an okay job explaining it? Because some of it is like real military jargon, and some is like futuristic military jargon that he's kind of made up for the story.
Right. I think this book had the opposite issue that, like, Molly in the last episode mentioned that she didn't like the way that Ernest Cline did world building, that he was over explaining things. There were literally parts of this book where the author said, I'm not going to explain what the uniform looks like to you because it's been pictured enough. I'm like, you are writing sci-fi. Nobody knows what this looks like. You need to explain this to us. Come on, get your life together.
But there was a lot of vagueness and
Right.
like insinuating what's going to happen in
Right.
this made up future world.
Right. But I watch enough
Mhm.
sci-fi movies that like I feel like I could grasp the sci-fi of it. One of the things I did like was the use of like 50s lingo in the sci-fi world. I thought that was like
Mhm.
really cool. And I mean,
Yeah.
unintentional. That's when he was writing it.
Right.
Right, because it was
But
written then,
I
right?
definitely,
Yeah.
right,
Now
right.
it's kind
But
of
I
retro.
definitely, right,
Yeah.
exactly. And now it almost is laughable. But I struggled with the military aspect of it because I just don't know enough. Because even though I was a military wife, a dependent, I hate that term, but I was military dependent for, you know, most of my marriage. I met my husband after boot camp, after A school. Like, so I didn't
He was
know.
already in for a while.
Yeah, like he, when we met in 2009, well, he had already been in for, 8 years ish, 8 or 9
Mhm.
years. So there
Mhm.
were a lot of things that happened in the early part of your military career that like I'm just not privy to. Like, and it's probably like I probably should have asked him those questions like when we were, I don't know,
Dating?
but it just,
Yeah.
I don't know. It just never came up. And I mean, I know some things about boot camp, but like there were definitely a lot of moments in this that I was like pausing the audiobook or putting down the physical book and being like, babe, I need to ask you a question because I just really didn't know. But when we were talking about this, when he and I were talking about this, he said, even though you don't know it, April, you have to think about the fact that when this book was written in the 50s, the people who would have been reading it would have just come out of World War II.
Right.
And not just the people who were enlisted in World War II, but you have like the Rosie the Riveters and, the women who were in the Red Cross. And so you have a large population of people that would have known military culture better
That's
than
a
I
valid
do
point.
as
Good
someone
job, Tom.
in 20. I know. He's so smart sometimes. Mad props to him. But so like that makes sense. Like when this was written, you wouldn't have necessarily needed to know these things directly because you experienced them. You would have been immersed in the culture of that. So
Right.
yeah.
I actually hadn't thought about that before. That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the last episode, we talked a little bit about whether Ready Player One is actually science fiction or not. I think all of us kind of landed on not so much. And Starship Troopers is like definitely considered like classic science fiction, right?
Right.
However,
It's a basis
usually
for a lot of.
yeah.
It's
Usually when I recommend this book to people, I actually, and I don't think that I might have mentioned this to you guys before you read it. I actually tell them it's not science fiction. It's actually political science. And he also includes this kind of interesting science fiction-y timeline, storyline to keep things interesting. So giving it 2 stars, I don't know, maybe you're not going to change your stars. Would it, if you approached it as like compared to other dry political science narratives, would that change your opinion of? Okay.
No, because I've read Ayn Rand and I love Ayn Rand, and that's all dystopian wrapped in politics, and I love that. So
true. Yeah. Anyway, that's something that I tell people is like I'm like it's not science fiction, it's political science. There's also a storyline.
Like, for me, I don't believe that there are girl books and boy books. Like everyone can read whatever they want, and genres don't matter. But this is a boy book, Isaac. This is a boy book.
It's dry.
I can see that. That's fair.
But it's not. But I mean, I'm being honest. Like I flagged 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different quotes that I was like, "That's profound," and that doesn't happen a lot with me. So
I'm curious what some of your other quotes were actually.
Let's see.
Some of the boot camp stuff had me rolling, seeing like comparisons, because like when he's in the first round of boot camp, it's the torture, taking away the bedrolls, that kind of thing. You can see like comparisons to regular boot camp where you're like, you're laughing because something like this has happened to you. Like we had a company that got all their towels taken away one day because they kept leaving them in the showers, and you don't do that in boot camp. So everybody was wet.
All right, here are some other quotes. War is not violence and killing, pure and simple. War is controlled violence for a purpose. Of all the so-called natural human rights that have ever been invented, liberty is least likely to be cheap and is never free of cost.
Okay.
This one's a little bit lengthier, but peace is a condition in which no civilian pays any attention to military casualties which do not achieve page one lead story prominence, unless that civilian is a close relative of one of the casualties. But if there ever was a time in history when quote unquote peace meant that there was no fighting going on, I have been unable to find out about it.
Yeah.
Next one. This was I just picked because it's kind of my husband and I. Marriage is a young man's disaster and an old man's comfort. We got married in our very late 20s, so we got a late start on everything. If you get killed or let someone else get killed, quote unquote, by the book, it's just as permanent as any other way. Those are the ones I flagged.
Well, those are some good ones, and like every time that I read it, I know what you mean. There are like so many other like individual one-liners that are so profound in there, and I think it's right in there with that same quote about liberty that you brought up. He has this like discussion about liberty in terms of like supply and demand economics determining cost, and and when it comes to liberty, what does he say? Like ultimate price, meaning willingness to lay down your life, perfect value.
Right.
I'm like, oh,
and there's
wow.
There's a real big conversation about social responsibility in this book,
Mm-hmm.
And I actually had Matt was listening off and on with me as I've been listening to it, as I've been listening to this book, and it was in one of the classes where they talk about philosophy and politics and all that. And they're talking about social responsibility, and everyone, like, the definition of social responsibility is different for each of us, right? I didn't see military service as a social responsibility. I saw it as an option on the way out of my small town. Some people, there was a big group of kids our age that joined up after 9/11 because they felt it was their social obligation to help protect the United States. And
which would have been the same as the time period when this book was written.
Right. And
there would have been a bunch of people with
social obligation. But then it goes back to like a civilian level. What do you view as a social responsibility as a civilian? Is it reporting crimes? Is it helping your neighbor mow their lawn? What is the definition of social responsibility to you? And that can get very muddy depending on who you're talking to, right?
Yeah.
Because some people are very just, I worry about me and mine. That's it. Whatever happens in front of me, as long as it doesn't affect me and mine, I'm moving on. And then there's others that are very like civically minded that think social responsibility is everyone's responsibility.
Well, I think the book makes the argument that at least in the future, we won't know what our civil responsibility is, and we have to be taught it because they literally have to take a class in high school.
Right. I don't know.
That they have to learn why they need to be responsible. Right. And that class keeps coming up throughout the book, right? And that's one of the times where the freedom isn't free. He also talks about corporal punishment in there, which you mentioned, Isaac. And basically he's teaching them the thoughts that they need to have. And
for what's expected of them to have.
Right. And I really struggled with that part, especially when he was talking about like spanking your kids and like why kids need to be spanked and things like that. Like, we're not spankers. Like, we're also, we fairly punish our kids. Like, they get punished when they need to be. Our kids are really good, so we don't really have to worry about that a lot. But like, to me, I think some kids are over punished for things that they can't necessarily control. And like my oldest son is on the autism spectrum, and he has a lot of meltdowns, and there are parents that would like beat him for the way that he acts, but he literally can't control it.
Yeah.
So for me, that part was really hard because I don't agree with that. Like, I do not think that is the way to raise your children. I think punishing them needs to be based on who they are as humans, because you're raising them to be human adults. You're not raising them to be puppies to dogs, which is the analogy that's in the book.
Right.
Yeah.
I also don't think that that's how you should raise a puppy, but that's a totally separate discussion.
Yeah.
I mean,
so this is interesting that you bring that up, because the last episode we talked about kind of the definition of young adult literature and whether, how clear an author is about whether they're being prescriptive versus descriptive, or if the author is teaching something as fact versus admitting that it's just their opinion. And I would say in this book, like, clearly all of these things that the book teaches are Robert Heinlein's political opinion, right?
Of course.
And 100%. I think it's important
this is all his...
Right.
Yeah.
And yet he, as much as I love the book, like, one of my criticisms would be that he approaches all of that as though it's like totally factual and beyond any logical question, right? And it's like, well, no, actually, this is a controversial issue that people disagree about, whether it's how you raise your kids, how you raise your puppy, the capital corporal punishment, like all of those things are very controversial issues that he approaches saying, oh, it's just logic and science, and we know the right answer. Here's the right answer. So I think you have to approach the book cautiously from that perspective, especially for a younger reader that could just take it at face value.
Right. Well, I don't think you're asking. I know what you're saying, and this isn't really what you're saying, what genre this would fall under, but just so you know, when this book was written, YA didn't exist. So this would definitely be adult sci-fi. And I even think now, like, even though we have the new adult category, which we talked about the last episode, I don't even think I would put it in that, even though he is arguably a new adult because he's, graduating and whatever. To me, this is just adult sci-fi. And it's so heavily into the political side of things that I don't think younger readers would really fully understand it. I actually
much philosophy in there.
Yeah, there's a lot. And that didn't bother me. Like I said, I like Ayn Rand, so I mean, I really can't complain about it being in there. But for me, it was all the military jargon that made it difficult for me. And I disagree with Molly that bugs aren't scary. They're freaking scary. I don't care how big they are.
This is really, in the 1950s, you thought our biggest villain in the future is going to be bugs?
Well, we just defeated the Nazis, so they weren't around anymore.
Nazis what down? Next, the space spiders.
Listen, I'm not sure. I mean, that's not the only thing they battle, because the beginning of the book, they're not talking about the spiders. It's something else. I can't remember.
So, it was another alien species that they ended up being allied with later. So let me pose it to you like this. So in the 1950s, you're saying that our biggest fear, our biggest threat was not bugs, not a colony hive of bugs, not
I really don't think
a communist society.
Ding, ding, ding.
I really don't think...
That's what it was, Molly.
Okay.
It wasn't about them being bugs.
Freaking symbolism, I didn't get. I told you guys I wasn't smart enough for this book.
Right, so the way that to bring the listeners along, the way that the bugs function as soldiers, as warriors, is in this hive. Think like ants or something like that, where even like their mental control is coming from the hive mind that's underground, right? So that's definitely what he's talking about there is communism, and that's
he's just bringing fear. That's cool. Fear mongering.
He's not though, because Molly, that fear was already there. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
No, I mean, I found it like I could definitely see the symbolism and the connection to like that post World War II world in which communism was like, it was a fear. It was a rising fear through the 50s and 60s and 70s. And I guess really
the
80s too,
80s.
and even still today. But anyway, but I thought it was interesting that his way of defeating it was a global government, which I would
ran by
completely
veterans.
disagree with. I do not agree that is the way to better our world and society, is for all of us to have this, like, I know it's going to sound awful when I say this, but when we all have this harmonious world where we're all one world, my religious beliefs say that that's going to be the beginning of the end. So that was not something I was supporting.
Well, and
but I don't ever see this. I mean, like, basically the only way to be a functioning adult in the society was to have served in the military. Anyone could serve. It was everyone's right. You could do it at any time, but you weren't
his dad signed up.
Right. But you weren't a voting member of society.
But that's all that it got you. That's all that it got you, was the right to vote. And that was like one of those whole discussions is
Didn't they say something
his
about
dad, I think, even calls it a frivolous.
I missed that. I'm sorry.
Isaac, can you repeat that? You cut out.
No, sure. Yeah. So that's all that it was. We're talking about being a functional adult in this society, but like all of the successful businessmen, when it comes to like commerce, were not full citizens, so they didn't have the right to vote. But like even the discussion with his dad in the book, he refers to the right to vote as, like, I think he calls it a frivolous privilege or something like that.
Right.
But wouldn't you think that the way to fight communism would be through a democratic society in which everyone has the right to vote? I mean, that's the polar opposite, right?
Right.
Well, and that's kind of his discussion. And like, this book has made me think, because like I don't agree with all of his views in this book by any means, but sometimes reading things that challenge my views kind of make me see different perspectives where, like you said, I would think like democracy, where everybody has the right to vote, that seems reasonable. But then his explanation of why we should actually make it harder to vote, and his justification for that in the book is that not that people who have served in the military are any more intelligent or anything like that. In fact, he explains that that's totally not true. He's like, that's the method that we've used, and it wasn't even that, not that they've earned it. He's like, that's the one group of people we've identified who's actually demonstrated that they're willing to put the good of the whole ahead of their own good, and that's the group that we want to vote. Which logically, I can see the argument, makes sense.
Well, and
there are some countries that do that, right? In order to, like, Switzerland, for example, even though Switzerland is notorious for not being involved in conflict, every 18-year-old man in Switzerland has to serve in the military. It's a requirement. Right. It's the same thing in Korea as well. They are required to serve.
Isn't it?
We don't have that requirement here.
Thing?
What?
Israel, I think, requires
Israel's the same. Too. Yeah, mandatory service. Yeah. But he talks about that in the book too, how the mandatory service would defeat the purpose of that selection process, because then it's not voluntarily putting the good of the whole ahead of your own good.
I just don't want to live in a place where if I don't serve in the military, then I don't have the freedoms that I have, like, to vote, because I had no desire to be in the military. I didn't enlist. I didn't have the desire to be married to someone in the military. Tom Watkins just weaseled his little way in there. But so for me, like, that's not the world I want to live in. You know what I mean? I want to have the freedom to do those things.
I feel like, okay, it's kind of kitty corner to one of my arguments I have a lot. I feel like military service should be a requirement when you serve in higher government. If you have the ability to declare a war, you should know what that means to those people that you're about to send off.
While I agree with you, I do not think it should be a requirement in order to be in that leadership, but I tend to vote for people that have that experience.
I feel like you cannot know the depths of what that means without having that time. Mm-hmm. If you have not raised your right hand and sworn to give your life to this country, how are you supposed to know what it feels like to be put in the danger like that?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but if you look at the political structure of our country, I'm not sure if Joe Biden serve in the military?
No, but his children have, and
so
has lost
he didn't.
Children. Yeah.
Trump didn't. I mean, sort of. He didn't.
I mean, Bush was
Obama
in
didn't.
the Coast Guard reserves, right?
Obama didn't. So the last one to do it, so Bush Jr. didn't. So
Bush Jr. was in the reserves.
Right, I know. And so was the last one, Clinton didn't.
Nope.
Clinton didn't.
So the last one to
was
serve
Bush
in
Senior.
the military, Bush Senior.
Right.
That's 6 presidents ago.
I know.
Right.
I know. But I'm...
Right.
But
and this is part of what I love about the book is it brings up some of these like kind of controversial issues and gives you a framework for thinking about one of the perspectives. Yeah. Now, I will say one of the things that he also brings up. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say you might be pushing me to a 2.5.
Okay.
You might be pushing me to a 2.5 stars.
So I think one of the interesting things that he also brings up is why, and like, it's kind of funny when you bring up this line of thought to somebody in the military, a lot of them are like, oh yeah, we should be the ones with the right to vote. But then one of the other things that he brings up is an explanation of why anybody who's currently serving should not have the right to vote.
Right. It's contradictory.
And then they're like, oh no, like we can't have that.
It's just a shit show.
So
okay, on to the next question.
Okay, elephant in the room. Did either of you watch the movie?
I didn't.
I watched the first one. I was forced to watch the first one in middle school with my cousin.
And it's pretty terrible.
I remember it. It is terrible.
They shouldn't have even given it the same name. Like it barely follows the storyline and like does not capture the essence of the book at all.
It talks about the bugs.
Right. Well, I don't think you can have a book like this and actually get the point of it across in a movie.
True.
Maybe,
but they didn't even have the cool mechanized suits in the book.
No.
Or I mean, in the movie.
On the bounce. That's what it was. On the bounce.
On the bounce. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe HBO can make it into a series that will be better served.
I don't need that.
Right.
I don't need that.
Right, because like I said, this is if you treat it as political science, like you just can't make it into a movie and do it any justice.
Right.
So, hey, I'm looking at my questions real quick here. We talked about some of the
There's
jargon.
A lot of politics.
Oh,
there's a lot of politics in the Hunger Games, and they were able to translate that onto film. But I think it was different because it was YA.
That's true.
And there were a lot of explosions, and it was fantastical in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So I think that translates a little bit better. Mm-hmm. Something like this, there's a lot of politics in Star Wars, you know? But
I feel like this is more...
I still don't think this one would work that way.
Right. Well,
anyways,
a lot of that stuff, like if you look at the politics in Star Wars or the politics in Dune or the politics in Hunger Games, a lot of that's more like thematic and subtle as opposed to this, where it's like, okay, we're going to have this flashback to a lecture, like literally just a lecture where we explain this political opinion.
Right. We're sitting in a classroom.
Right.
You get it.
Right.
So I kind of want to contrast this with Ready Player One a little bit. So we apparently have this kind of utopian society, right? I mean, never mind that we're also being like destroyed by bugs,
Space
but
bugs.
Like life on Earth seems pretty good, and that seems to be equated with what Molly was talking about with this level of responsibility, personal. Mm-hmm. They call it civic virtue, personal accountability, personal responsibility. One thing that we talked about in the last episode was all these people living in this virtual world where there's no personal responsibility, other than losing your virtual money and virtual possessions, if you happen to get killed. Like there's no personal accountability for the way that you treat people, right? The way that the things that you would say to people, your actions in that virtual world.
Right.
And in that world we had like this total dystopian society. So did you guys pick up on that at all, or see a connection between the two books there? What are your thoughts on that?
This feels like a book to me that James Halliday would have liked. So that's the connection that I find. Like I feel like this would have been a book that he would have been a fan.
Oh yeah. And he would have tried to make a game about it.
And he read it.
Right.
Is it mentioned
it actually mentions in Ready Player One.
Oh.
It doesn't mention Starship Troopers, but it does mention that he read every single Heinlein book.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So that would include Starship Troopers. So I found myself wondering if there was if somewhere in the Oasis was like a planet Klendathu with bugs.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Had to be, right?
There is. Had to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, this is definitely more sci-fi than Ready Player One is, because I said last episode, like if it happens in space, it's sci-fi for me. But it's political as well, definitely.
It's very political.
So
heavy.
But I do think these books actually go well together. To do 2 episodes with you as our guest, like I feel like they've gone really well together. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so too. So one thing that I will mention, having read like a lot of different Heinlein books, this one, if this is all that people read, sometimes it comes across as being like very like ultra like conservative American militaristic kind of that whole point of view.
From it. Little bit.
I got pro-military. I didn't get the conservative. This is like no government. Like we want one super government, but also no government, which is not a political affiliation.
You get to pick. We're picking and choosing who gets to vote based off their military service.
Right. No, I see what you're saying. And maybe not even no government, but this is like hyper centralized government. And that's like, part of the disagreement in US in very broad terms in US politics is like, power with the federal government versus more power with the states, centralized versus decentralized, all of that. This is definitely like the extreme of that centralized government. I was going to mention before too, along the same lines, when we were talking about the bugs, the hive being the like kind of analogous to communism. The other thing that he brings up is before we went to war with I was not actually there in the book. Before we as humans
we talk about
went to war with the bugs.
Real life people all the time. You're fine.
He presented, I think it was like kind of 3 world powers. One basically being the United States and Western Europe, Russia and China, and like all of the parts of the globe that they controlled. And it's interesting in like the time that the book is taking place, they're all united because of a common enemy.
Right.
So as people's universe expands and they realize, oh, it's not just us here on Earth, that kind of allowed them to.
I can see that happening. If we are, as planet Earth, being attacked by some mysterious space spiders, I can see the world powers getting together to fight it off. I don't see us becoming one major, happy government. It's just, there's too many personalities.
No, I don't either, nor would I even want that. Right.
It's just too much that spread across so much, right?
I actually was surprised about. I'm making an assumption here that Johnny was Filipino.
I was getting Hispanic of some sort.
No, he's Filipino because at the end he mentions Tagalog, which is the native
but then
language.
He was talking about his mom going back to Brazil.
Well, I don't know, but he speaks the native language. Wait,
is that okay? Now I'm second guessing myself.
Tagalog,
I thought that was the person he was talking to.
Is that what it was? Maybe I got confused.
I thought so. Yeah. Then I might be confused too. I mean, he was
so
right, Juan Rico, and he's from like Brazil.
Okay,
I think
maybe I had that wrong, but because my thought was it was interesting that he would have made his main character be someone who was Asian because of the feelings at the time of people who were Asian in this country. Like there was a lot of Asian hate because of the Japanese. So I thought that was interesting, but I guess I misread that, and it wasn't him that it was, but it's still interesting.
And I could be wrong. I think that was the person talking to him. Yeah,
you might be right. But at the beginning of the book, his dad talks about somebody. Oh, that guy's probably a foreigner. We have a world government. How is anybody a foreigner? Like, there's a world government,
right?
Okay, I am on the film wiki, so take that with a grain of salt. It says his hometown is Buenos Aires.
Buenos Aires,
which that is Brazil. So that would make him Brazilian.
Right. So I must have been reading it wrong, and it was the other person that he was talking to. But I still stand beside the point that if his dad was mad that somebody was a foreigner, it was like, no, that guy's a foreigner. And I'm like,
see that now.
But it's a world government. But Molly, it's a world government. So how can anybody be a foreigner? Everybody's
we see that now. We see national.
Well, we don't have a world government right now. If the whole world is one government, then no one is really a foreigner. Everybody's part of the same government.
I know. It's just
we're also not supposed to like his dad's perspective at that point in the book.
No,
like that's supposed to paint a picture of his dad, right?
Yeah. I don't find his dad to be redeeming, even after he enlists and like that whole thing. Like, I don't find him redeeming.
Y'all are obviously smarter than me because of this.
And Buenos Aires is in Argentina. I think you were thinking of Rio. So I think it mentions Rio. Anyway.
Good. I'm just showing how stupid I am. Let's just go into that.
It's okay. I thought it was too. So
no, I'm glad that you brought that up. What is? Go ahead, Molly.
Okay. Y'all are obviously getting way more out of this book than I am. What is the symbolism about the father? Because he gets this whole redemption arc, right? First he hates him, then they don't talk, and then all of a sudden he's going on his ship and going to be a roughneck too.
But his dad only does that because his mom died.
Right, but what's the point? What is the point that the author's trying to make? That's what I don't get.
Grief makes you do stupid things?
Honestly, I mean, it explains it, and I think maybe if there was more character development with the dad, it would have made more sense. But he explains his perspective on like the reason he did it had a little bit to do with the mom dying, but was really because he was jealous of Johnny for doing something that he never had the guts to do himself. So, honestly, I think that part could have been entirely left out.
Don't they mention that his dad has a Harvard accent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So his mom is from Argentina.
Buenos Aires. Yes.
Argentina?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And his dad is from
the States of United,
somewhere?
I guess?
Northeast somewhere?
Maybe. I don't think it actually says, but yeah.
But it mentions him having a Harvard accent and being very proud that he was like a Harvard man.
Yeah.
Right.
A Harvard man. Anyways.
Molly, he's not British.
That's how the Harvard men speak.
That is not how the Harvard men speak.
So I was going to say, I'm glad that you brought up the racial question and the inclusion of all of these different races in the book. There's actually another book that Heinlein wrote called Friday, and the entire, you might say that the entire point of this book is making an argument for, why you should have to serve in the military to vote or something like that.
Uh-huh.
The entire point of Friday is actually all about getting over biases against other people, whether it's gender bias, racial bias, religious bias, and including all people as equals as humans. And that's like the entire point of a whole Heinlein novel. Which is kind of interesting in contrast with.
I probably won't. Yeah. He's a little dry for me.
Okay, 2 3/4 stars on that one.
I thought it was really funny. I'm sorry to segue here. I thought it was really funny that I knew he was a Navy guy. Heinlein was a Navy guy, but he talks about how the military branches don't get along, and I just thought that was so real because my limited time being a military dependent, It's so real that none of you guys get along. I mean, you guys do for the greater good.
I married a Marine, I know.
But there's like, the whole puddle pirate thing, that the Coast Guard's puddle pirates, and the chair force and things like that. Like that's what I think of, and I'm like, he's dogging on the Navy in the book because he's not in the Navy in the book. The main character's not in the Navy in the book, but Heinlein was a Navy guy himself. Right. So I thought that was really interesting. That felt real to me.
I really was, when he's a roughneck in chapters 9 and 10, and he's waxing poetical about his lieutenant, and how much he was so glad he was there when the lieutenant died, and all this jazz. It was like, I've never been that poetic about like a superior officer, but I get that gist. I get that point. There are people that you're willing to lay your life on the line for because they are excellent leaders. Isaac and I had one that was above us that I still would go to the ends of the earth for. That man would give me his kidney if he had. But the
interesting thing about the way the book is written, it's not the enlisted that will go to the ends of the earth for the officers. It's the officers that will go to the ends of the earth for their enlisted. They really do care and take care of the people.
I mean, the way people talk about yeomen is how most people talk about officers. No offense, Isaac, but like, y'all get bagged on pretty damn hard.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up, because April, you were talking about like how the different branches like rag on each other all the time, right? And there's kind of an unwritten rule that most of your ragging needs to be done in the presence of someone who's actually in that service. Like, I'm not going to talk a bunch of crap about the Air Force unless I'm talking to a guy who's in the Air Force, and then it's kind of all good fun. And then, like within each branch, like if you just have Army or you just have Navy or whatever, there's going to be that same rivalry between MOSs, between the occupational specialties.
Oh yeah.
You know how much crap I get for being a yeoman?
Exactly.
Yeah. Our friend Philip said that he didn't know OSs existed. He thought they were mythical creatures. My husband was an OS, but Philip was what was Philip?
He's a DC.
So he had never actually met an OS before.
No, because they had completely different jobs
and different schedules.
Different jobs, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. We have a very good friend.
But then when it really comes.
And when they're all together, when my husband and all his friends are together, everyone's Coast Guard except for the one friend who's Air Force, and it becomes a nice friendly rivalry.
Right, because when it really comes down to it, like we're all on the same team, whether it's officer enlisted, whether it's yeoman versus DC versus OS, or infantry versus artillery, or Army versus Navy, or whatever. Like we're all on the same team with the same mission.
Because we all did the same thing. We all raised our hand. We all said our life was their life then.
But can I ask you guys a question that's not really relevant to this book, but is relevant to this conversation we're having?
Sure.
Do you still feel like that as Coast Guardsmen? Because the Coast Guard isn't DOD anymore. And there have been times, for instance, the education your college being paid for, that was protected on DOD, but not Coast Guard. So there was a time where they weren't even. I mean,
the Coast Guard's always been the redheaded stepchild.
That's what I'm wondering. Do you still feel like you guys have the same mission, even though like it's sort of like? I mean, honestly, I feel like Space Force being invented kind of gives you guys a leg up now.
Our oath, my defense, even though we are different departments. The oath I took and the oath the Marine next to me that day took was the same exact thing. I just get to choose if I want to go over there. You know what I mean? He doesn't get a choice. He gets orders. And unless it's in a wartime, I get to pick if, like, volunteer to go into a war zone. That's the only variation, right?
I don't know that that's always true because... Tom has been on cutters that went into war zones. That wasn't
but I mean,
really
like me as a yeoman,
not voluntary,
as Molly sitting desk.
Right. So that's. I'm glad you brought that up, Molly, because I think that's something that maybe from the civilian side, a lot of people have like not the greatest perspective on. so the difference, the DoD versus DHS, and actually when I went into the Coast Guard was DOT, Department of Transportation, pre 9/11, when DHS didn't even exist yet, right? So yeah, so that's really, honestly, that's an administrative difference, and most people who have served in the military realize that you can't make value. I'm not like accusing you of making a value judgment, don't get me wrong, but you can't make a value judgment based on somebody's job that they happened to do in the military. Like somebody could be in a completely admin support role in the Army or the Marines, or they could be in the Coast Guard, the stepchild of the military, the not real military, and they could be doing high value boardings every day, jumping onto onto
my brother-in-law was a box kicker in the Marine Corps,
hostile crews or whatever, and everything, every single branch, but like Molly said, every single one of us, regardless of that job, raised our hand and took the oath. So I think most people who have served realize that you can't make that distinction, and most of the time when that distinction is made, it's the good-natured ribbing between the services or between specialties in the service. And
there is some douche nozzles that do just tell us straight up. There are some knuckleheads in other branches who are really jerks about it and are really nasty.
Well, I mean, coming from the wife's perspective, I have a friend whose husband's a retired Marine now, but she told me that I wasn't a real military wife because my husband was just in the Coast Guard. No. And I was like, my husband's been gone most of our marriage and yours has been there the entire time. So I don't know what you're talking about.
No, I saw more action in my short time at a small boat station than my brother-in-law, who was in the Marine Corps for 8 years. My brother-in-law was stationed in San Diego as a box kicker for 8 years. I did more active things as a military member than him. Well, so it really depends.
My point in bringing this up was that, as a civilian looking at this, a lot of the times the Coast Guard is not as protected as the other branches. Nope. I mean, we literally had a president who stood and said that the Coast Guard doesn't do anything. And to me, that's just a complete misunderstanding of what you all actually did when you were in service and what the Coast Guard continues to do. I didn't know what the Coast Guard did. When I met Tom, the only thing I knew was seeing The Guardian, which is not at all accurate.
0 out of 10 accuracy. Uniforms were right. Sorry, I'll give it a 1.5 for uniforms.
Oh, it was better than that other Coast Guard movie that just came out a couple years ago. What was that?
Oh, The Finest Hour?
Oh, The Finest Hours was based on a true story, though. That one was based
but it was bad. It was bad.
The movie was terrible.
Oh, I liked the movie.
Yeah.
And I've read the book, so...
Can we go back to the book?
Oh, the way that it portrayed the Coast Guard was embarrassing to me, personally. Oh. But... sorry.
No, I mean...
You're allowed to like it. That's fine.
It's fine. No, I just think that, there's just such... from the civilian side of things, I just think that, there's a protection that comes with DoD that the Coast Guard is not. When the government is shutting down and they go in Congress and they're going to protect everyone DoD, they also have to include the Coast Guard because it's separate. And they don't always remember to do that. And Molly and I had friends that I'm sure you did too, Isaac. Yeah, I'm sure you did too, Isaac. We had friends that were going to food banks because they weren't getting a paycheck.
Right.
Right. And
you I went through
right.
I went through that.
And you can say you guys took the same oath, but the government isn't treating you the same. So
we know. We know. We've been dealing with it for a long time.
Yeah.
Or, half the time when they play all of the service anthems to say thank you to the veterans, at least half the time they forget the Coast Guard. Yeah. But
or you see all of the military branches symbols displayed and they don't have the Coast Guard, and I'm
you know what my new favorite one is? At NFL games, when they pull out the guard and they bring out the flags, the Coast Guard used to be last. Now it's last after Space Force.
It's last still. So we at the middle school where I'm the librarian.
I have words for it, but we're on a clean podcast.
the middle school where I'm the librarian, the VFW, local VFW donated flags of each branch, and we do have Coast Guard and Space Force in there. Actually, because of where I'm located in coastal Virginia, we have students whose parents are in the Space Force.
Mm-hmm. Really? Space Force?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But there's like 12 of them.
One
you
last
must have
thing
all
on that.
of them. We really need to get back to the book.
Last
We're
thing
an
on
hour
that
in.
before we move on. And I'm sure Molly would agree with this, but none of us, well, I wouldn't say none of us. I'm sure there are those out there who did. Most of us did not join up for any sort of public recognition. So it's like when the Coast Guard gets ignored or whatever,
did it to escape
it's water off my back. Totally don't care. Yeah.
Tom's original enlistment date was supposed to be September 11th, 2001, but obviously the tragedy of 9/11 happened. So the office was closed. But he was that was his enlistment date. He went to college for a year, but he did it kind of because his parents wanted him to go to college, but that's not ever what he wanted. And so he dropped out of college and enlisted in the Coast Guard. So he actually has the medal for enlisting after 9/11, but like that wasn't why he signed up. So, but yeah, that was his original enlistment date. So
I was supposed to go right before Katrina, and my recruiter goes, and like then Katrina hit, and my recruiter goes, "Let's wait till the fall, okay?" Okay. He goes, "It's just for your best interest." Okay, Chief. Whatever you say, Chief. I don't know why you're saying this. I've seen the news, but obviously he was protecting me from cleaning up rubble for a good 6 months. He was literally protecting me from just throwing shit in dumpsters.
So,
okay, back to the book.
Let me ask you what you thought about the book's portrayal of the military. In contrast to maybe like the stereotypical portrayal of the military as being like just mindless robots who follow orders, I think the book definitely explained some of the importance of understanding why you're doing what you're doing, having that trust in your leadership, how that leadership is built. Even it brings up some different leadership principles. And then also Johnny's perspective on the military as he progresses from being a civilian to a boot recruit to a trained recruit to a combat drop veteran to a sergeant, so an NCO, to OCS, to actually being an officer back in the mobile infantry, and how his perspective on the military and military leadership changed. So what popped out to you as maybe some of the, I don't know, call it leadership lessons from the books or surprises in the way that it portrayed the military?
I was surprised on how relevant and accurate some of it was still today. He based that stuff off of his experience, but his experience is like when it came to boot camp and training and leadership and all these things he experienced, and the feeling of, I hate this term, brotherhood, right? That sense of family you get when you're in service with people. All of that feeling, that vibe is the same today as it was then, which I was surprised that transitioned, even though some of the lingo's changed, even though like jobs and duties are not the same. That whole transition of boot camp to going from one station to another station and getting that sense of brotherhood and bonding, that never changes. And he nailed what it's like, in my opinion.
I guess I feel like I don't have enough perspective on what it's like to serve to actually fully appreciate that of it. Okay. But for me, I didn't find it realistic that so many people that enlisted solely for the ability to vote, because there were people that's the reason that they enlisted. They didn't do it for the
they tried to deter them
to serve their country. They just wanted to be in long enough to get their franchise and then get out.
Mm-hmm.
To me, if that were the purpose that so many people were enlisting, I feel like it would be more chaos and like people wouldn't actually be doing the things they're supposed to be doing, because you just do the bare minimum and get out. And I didn't know anyone in the Coast Guard that did that, but I do know people in other branches that like they enlisted for long enough to have the 4 years so they could get their college paid for, and then they got out, and that was
That's
it.
what Matthew Bakes did.
Well, I'm not saying that Matthew did the bare minimum. I don't know what Matthew's time in service was.
He'll tell you he skated. he picked up E5 and he was shocked.
Well, I mean, again, this goes back to those branches are so much larger than the Coast Guard. I think you can get away with it more in them. But for me, I think that was unrealistic. If so many people were joining just for the purpose of being able to have that franchise, I don't think there would have been that many good soldiers. I think you just would have been like, go kill the bugs yourself. I'm done. I don't need
a couple things on that. So there's a discussion in the book where Johnny's actually saying, like, he's asking that exact same question. He's like, why did I sign up? It was for, to earn the right to vote, right? Or was it? And then he kind of realizes some of these other things that were the actual reasons why he signed up and the actual reasons why he's serving.
He signed up because
he actually
there was a pretty
talks
girl
about
that went up.
There was a pretty
He signed up because
there's that too. He sees like one more time in his life.
He didn't sign up because he wanted to be in the military.
Pro tip: don't enlist in the Army because there's a pretty girl who's going to be a Navy pilot. It's not going to work out.
Seriously,
that's not going to work out for you, Boo.
Seriously.
But then the other thing.
Go ahead, finish.
So the other thing is, remember, in boot camp it talks about some of the numbers. So it's not like you just have a bunch of people who only joined up to earn that right to vote, because in his boot camp, which for the listeners, boot camp in this book is like, imagine like boot camp combined with like Special Forces Q course. Like it's taking you all the way from being like a raw recruit to Special Forces. So they have like it's like 93% attrition. So less than 1 out of 10 are even making it through training to even have the opportunity to go serve on active duty.
Yeah.
So with that kind of filter and that kind of attrition rate, you're only going to have the people who are the most committed make it through. You're not going to have a bunch of people who are just doing it for the right to vote, making it through the training.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
I mean, it's also a conversation about self-exploration, right? And finding yourself, because that's what a lot of people do. They join the military because they don't know who they are or what they want out of life. And, I mean, Johnny kind of did that. He found his purpose. He found his niche. He found what he was supposed to be. And, I mean, that wasn't his original intent when joining, but obviously it's a conversation to have. I mean, I found myself. I was definitely lost when I joined, and I kind of found
most of us didn't have a clue what we were doing when we were 18.
No, I mean, I literally did one class at college, and I walked out of there and I go, I am never coming back to this building. So, I mean, it is a real conversation about how, and I say this all the time on our pod, I tell kids that are about to graduate, if you don't know what you want to do, talk to a recruiter. There is something about military service that helps you find out who you are. Maybe it's realizing you have zero desire to do any of this, or maybe you find out this is the path you're supposed to be on. But either way, after you're done, you have college paid for. Like, you have options, and I really, I can't say it enough. There is something to be said for the option of wandering with a paycheck when it comes to the military. It does come with dangers, though, of course.
But if I could go back to when I was 18, if I could go back to when I was 18 and I was going, trying to decide what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, librarianship probably wouldn't have been there still, but it still wouldn't be military for me. It's not something that's in me. And that's a difference. Like, people that are signing up to find themselves, there still has to be something in you that would make you be a part of that, even if it's the bare minimum of 4 years and that's all you're doing. To survive boot camp, to survive all of the trainings and everything, you have to want to be a part of that. And for me, that was never a desire that I had. So it wouldn't have made a difference if I would have talked to a recruiter or not. I'd have been like, no, I'm not doing that. No.
I couldn't do team sports. I couldn't participate in group projects because other people irritated me. I literally went from being a solo act to just being like, yeah, I'll be one of thousands. I'm cool with that.
I just think that, like, I agree with you that not everybody is meant for college, Molly. And I do think that the military is definitely another option, although trade school is also an option. Like, I don't think the two options are college or military. But for me, going back to 18, it still wouldn't have been something I picked. Even now, as knowing more about the military, even now that I know what the Coast Guard was, because I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the only Coast Guard we have in Ohio. Well, no, we're not. Lake Erie. So we're not. And the District 9 Command Center is in Ohio, but that's that's the only Coast Guard in Ohio. No, there's Toledo. There's a lot in Ohio. I just remember there's like 4. So don't go on that. But like it wasn't where I was.
Moving on.
It wasn't where I was. So it wouldn't have been something I would have picked still. And the thing is to relate this to this book, if I had to serve in the military to have the right to vote, I don't know that I would have ever had the right to vote because it's not a part of who I am. I served my country as being Tom's wife and doing without him a lot while he was gone, a lot. And that was enough. And I am very happy to be not a military wife anymore.
So one of the things that really jumps out to me every time I read this book is how Johnny's perspective changes. Like we were talking about him going through those different stages. And when we wrap this up, I want to talk to you guys about who you would recommend this book to or how you would go about recommending it to them. So keep that in mind. But there are certain people that I recommend this book to. And I actually like to see how different people at like different stages, especially in a military career, what they take from the book. So like, for example, somebody who's just going into basic training, who's just enlisted and they're fresh recruit, if they read the book, oftentimes they'll get something like, okay, my lessons from this book are take responsibility for my actions and don't quit, and just know that as hard as things might be today, he talks about getting over the hump in boot camp, right? Yeah. At some point, my perspective's going to change and I'm not going to hate this anymore. I'll get over it and I'll start to have those feelings of camaraderie and pride in what I'm doing, and that'll make it worth it. So that'll help me not quit earlier on. And then by the time Johnny's like in OCS and actually put in leadership positions, or even like when he's kind of eavesdropping on the sergeant and the officer talking, and like how that kind of shifts his perspective on how the whole chain of command works. And then he ends up in a leadership position himself. And there are some lessons about like the value of decentralized command and making sure that everybody under you also understands their part of the bigger picture, and how even if they lose communication with you, they can still carry on the mission because they understand what's going on. And it's just so fundamental to leadership. And I think it doesn't matter whether we're talking military leadership or business leadership or call it even like family leadership or interpersonal relationships or whatever. I think that you call it decentralized command in the military. Maybe there's a different term for it on the civilian side, but the value of the people who are working for you actually understanding the reason for what they're doing and being able to be functional on their own. And again, in contrast with the bugs, who are like the complete opposite of the decentralized command, where they have that, that central brain way underground. And without that, they literally can't do anything. Like they don't even walk around anymore. They just stand there. So like I was saying, just all of those different kind of leadership lessons at different levels as he progresses through that career. I just find totally fascinating.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I also think it's important that he did rise up through the ranks instead of like starting as an officer. That's not to say that people that come in, that's not against you or anything, Isaac. Please don't take it that way. Coming out of the academy and starting, I don't mean it like that. I think for this story, it was important that he grew through the military.
Totally.
You know, the only thing I feel like we watched his whole rise. It would have really been nice to finish the book with like seeing his retirement.
It definitely did not have the payoff that I wanted it to have.
Right. I feel like I got. I mean, it was a long book, but I feel like I missed something. Like, this is how it ends. Yeah. There was no climax. There was no.
I actually thought he was going to die.
Right.
That's how it was going to end.
Right.
Because
bugs got him at one point. I was like, shit.
The bugs were like closing in, man. I thought he was going to die, and I was actually like, in some ways, I feel like that would have at least been a payoff.
Maybe that's why it ends so suddenly.
Well, no, he's in the hospital, but I mean, like I feel like that would have been maybe more of a payoff
with no legs.
No, I mean, remember at the end, he's the officer in command, and they're getting ready to jump.
Yeah, right.
And then it just ends. So maybe their ship got shot. I know.
Right.
If he died, there at least would have been a payoff, but I think I would have been pissed if I'd have gotten to the end of this.
Like we followed his whole career for him to die. Rude.
He died when he's not even a full officer yet. He's still a junior officer or officer in training.
As a man that went through academy, Isaac, you need to answer this question. WTF is with all this math? Why the heck is this? Why was math so dang important? Why did we have to listen to him have to take math lessons? And why? I don't understand the focus on the math books. I really, truly don't. It was driving me ape.
That's a good question. So a lot.
I have a reason.
You're putting me on the spot. So
I mean, you're the one with the shiny collar, not me.
I have a reason. I have a reason. But it's not because of, I don't know, maybe they do a lot of math. Isaac would have to answer that. But I just think it's because of space travel and all the math that was required.
But he's not a pilot.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The astronauts weren't necessarily even like piloting the spaceships. They still had to know math.
It felt useless.
Anyway, Isaac, is there an answer? Do you have to do a lot of math in OCS?
I think there are several.
Academy?
Oh yeah, OCS academies, all of that is going to be fairly math heavy, and there are a couple like very different reasons. So in the academy programs, most of the graduates from the academy are like getting an engineering degree also. So like by its very nature, getting an engineering degree is also math heavy. Also,
do you have an engineering degree?
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense as to why you're like building all this random crap.
I kid.
So, also like a lot of the officer specialties also end up being fairly math heavy. Maybe that's not even the best way to put it. So think like in the Coast Guard, like navigation. You'd think like, oh, we have
plotting
our electronic navigation,
I get it. It just,
GPS, all of that. But then, you're also required to learn celestial navigation, which is like extremely math heavy.
That's it is. It feels like we spent a lot of time about them explaining him having to study math, but not talking about why he has to study the dang math.
I don't think I needed an explanation.
I think he mostly threw that in there because he needed to have something to struggle with, and all the officer training programs are going to be math heavy, and it was just like one more thing, and that was part of that officer training program, which ends up being part of a lot of officer training programs where you're essentially asked to do the impossible. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, add up the hours in the day, add up how many hours you're expected to spend doing all of these things, and it ends up being more than 24 hours. So figure out a way to do it,
Cool.
and that's
No
kind of
thanks.
part of the filter
It's kind of the point.
on that whole training program. Yeah, exactly. That's part of the point, is just to make it harder. Now, I also think this being written in the 1950s, this kind of shows one of the shifts in the military from like World War II, Korea. This is written right at the end of
Mhm.
the 50s to the modern day military, where now in the modern day military, you have junior enlisted personnel who may be like, they may have a master's degree. They might actually be more educated than
Yeah.
the first
Mhm.
lieutenant or second lieutenant who's in charge of their platoon, right?
Right.
And that's something that's extremely important for officers in the modern military to realize, is that just because somebody is enlisted personnel that's working for you absolutely does not mean that they are not educated.
Do
As
you know how
in
many
contrast,
E3s and E4s I entered into the system at Sector that had bachelors and ups?
Mhm.
right,
Like,
right, yeah,
it's
exactly,
wild.
hmm right. As opposed to like in World War II, like if you had a college degree, you're basically automatically put into an officer training
Right.
program, and
Right.
at that point, um, how would I put this? At that point, there was almost an expectation that officers were like a different, like more educated class, and
Yeah, that they
I
were
think it's a really good
smarter.
thing that a
Yeah.
lot of that has gone away, because now like a good officer is going to rely so heavily on the enlisted personnel working for them being
Hmm.
absolute professionals in their field, and really
Right.
knowing what
Right.
they're doing in their field, even more than the officer knows about what's going on in that particular field. And the officer is expected to be a little more of a generalist. Now, back when this
Right.
was written in the 50s, it was still more of that more traditional mindset that the officers were expected to be almost a different, more educated, more refined, more polite class. So
Right.
the additional education in math and literature and history and all of that would absolutely be part of the training program.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I guess. Yeah. Sure. Yay, math.
Right.
Yay. I mean, I'm dyslexic, so numbers are not fun. So we're
Well,
lucky I got
and
through
it's
college algebra.
it's the Army too, so he needs to be able to count to at least 30 to like count his platoon, right?
I mean, yeah. I mean, and I mean, it's hard. Like, think about it. Like, what
It doesn't
happens
say
past
what
30?
level of math he's struggling with here.
Right. Right. I mean,
Oh man.
the only other like thing I had was I feel like the phrase "buying the farm" was used more than anything
It's a
else in
little
this book.
overused.
Like, I want to count. I need to know how many times this phrase was used in the book.
I'm sure
I need to know.
I'm sure you could find it on the interwebs.
Well,
Oh, I googled
and
it.
all of the
Nobody else has
variations of
counted it.
buying the farm,
Bought the
buying the
farm.
farm, bought it, looking at a
Got their
farm,
land.
real estate deal,
Yeah.
got his piece of it, right?
Yeah. Got their 40 acres. I get it. I get it.
Right. Yeah. It's
People
a
are dead.
little overused.
Yeah.
So, did you guys have anything else, or do you want me to wrap this up with one kind of final question?
I think you can wrap it up.
One more question. Hit us.
Okay. So, each of you, so we kind of talked about this a little bit before. There are certain people that I recommend this book to, but I don't just necessarily think that everybody is going to like it. I thought it'd be interesting to discuss on our podcast. Having read it now, are there certain people that you would or would not recommend the book for? And maybe call them out as individuals or just as general groups, whatever. And if so, if you were going to recommend this book to somebody, how would you phrase your recommendation? What cautions would you give them? What would you tell them that they should look for? What did you like or not like? Kind of.
So I don't tend to buy books that I'm not going to read, and especially books I don't think I will read more than once. And I bought this book, and the reason I bought this book was because I 100% planned to recommend it to my husband. Turns out he had already read it. But this is the kind of book that Tom Watkins loves. It's sci-fi, it's military, it's political science. It's a very Tom book. And so it's what I would have recommended to him. And I probably would have just taken it to him and said, baby, you got to read this book. It's this guy and he's in the military and like, it's just really good. And it's classic sci-fi. And he probably would have read it, except not in 2021 because he went on a book reading ban. It was the dumbest thing ever. For 2021, he decided
I have questions about that, but we'll get back to that.
But anyway, that
like,
I wouldn't really
give up reading for Lent. Is that allowed?
He did. It was stupid. I was questioning who I married. For me, I wouldn't need to, when I recommended it to him, I wouldn't need to go into like the cautions of like the things I would worry about, like that it would be too heavy on the military jargon because he would already know those things. But outside of Tom, it's not one that I would recommend to, like, it's not what I would recommend to my students, even my students that are sci-fi fans, just because the jargon is so heavy and because I do feel like there's just it's just deep. It's really saturated with the political aspects of what he believes. And so for me, it's not one that I would recommend outside of Tom, and he's already read it. So there you go.
For me, I'd end up recommending it to people that I know, that the people that come to mind, Matthew, people I know that like military books and people that I know that like sci-fi, but they don't read, right? So every person that's coming to mind, I know very well I could recommend this book to them and give them my best sales pitch, and I still know they wouldn't read it. Even though I know exactly, I can picture them in my head right now, and I know very well this would be exactly up their lane, and I know very well they would never read it because they don't read. They don't do audiobooks. Like, it's just the audience this is intended for don't pick up books anymore. Like,
ooh, that's a bold statement.
It's true. I mean, Isaac, you are a guy of our generation. You like sci-fi, you like the military aspect of it, and I'm sure you watch shows like that, but you actually read and do that kind of thing. There's not a lot that check the boxes you check that actually enjoy reading nowadays.
I don't think I agree with you totally on that, Molly, because I think that what they're reading is just not what we're reading. Like, I feel like Tom reads a lot of informational text, even though he went on like the book ban where he didn't read a book. He reads a lot of informational texts, and like to help us with our podcast, he had to do research on that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So I just think the way that we consume information is just different today, and so books isn't necessarily the way that's happening.
I'm saying the list.
I probably read like 5 informational books to every 1 novel that I read. So,
but the list of
I think there are a lot of people who are. Go ahead.
My intended audience in my dome. Not a single one of them are readers. They will read online articles. They'll read magazines. They'll read, but they're not reading informational books. Like, I know these people. I know them well. I know that if I hand them this book, they're going to be like, what do you want me to do with it? It's just my opinion. My opinion there. But
so, actually, I want to ask you something else about that. So you basically listed male as being one of the check boxes for somebody that you might recommend the book to. April, you brought up earlier that this is a boy's book.
It's a boy book.
I don't disagree with.
It's a boy book.
I don't disagree with that. In today's military, though, where almost every military occupation is open to males and females equally, do you think that would change at all? Do you think that this book would be equally applicable to a military female? Why or why not?
No,
and here's why for me. For me, there is...
It doesn't have a love story. They won't want it.
No, that's not why. No,
I'm
Molly.
joking.
For me, there is an underlying sexism that we didn't touch on in this book, but I think it would really bother enlisted women. They talk about
women have certain jobs they're only doing in the military.
The pilots are women because their voices are comforting, which is just really sexist.
And they're smaller, and that's important for pilots.
And and he consistently talks about how he wants to be like stationed outside of the barracks where the women are, and blah blah blah. Like there's a lot of underlying.
And the reason the women are on the ship is because for entertainment.
Yeah, I don't think enlisted women would like it. I don't think
so. That's really interesting to me. Like all of those things that you brought up. I'm not arguing at all, but it's interesting the difference in the way that I read that exact same thing versus the way that you read it, and the things that stood out to us. Like, and that's
because
fascinating to hear somebody else's perspective. So, like you said, like the reason that the women are pilots, it mentions their voice as their a calming voice as they're talking to the troops, and
my voice has never been described as
calming. and now I remember, it did say that, but I had actually forgotten about that part. And the part that I remembered was the discussion about the women having like superior reactions and being better at math, and like all of the positive reasons why they made them pilots and not the men.
But it comes off condescending when a man talks about it in that context.
Oh, no, you're so good at math. Good for you.
Yay!
Oh, you tried so hard. Oh, yay!
And I don't want to. I mean, I've had this conversation before on our podcast, and it's a bigger conversation about being a woman in the military and what it's like being female in the service. Now, my experience has not been as extreme as some women's, right? But I have still had situations that are uncomfortable. And this definitely does not touch on that, especially in that era in the 50s. It is would have been very uncomfortable to be a woman in the military because they were wearing skirts still. Women were still wearing skirts in active war.
Well, they weren't really allowed to serve the way that they are now. So I feel like when this book was being written, it was very provocative to say that women are serving right along with men.
I got something provocative for him right there.
No, and I think that's an important point. And like, to be fair to Heinlein, realizing that he was writing in the 50s, like the ideas around women serving that he was promoting at that time were very progressive, even if now they seem antiquated.
Condescending?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It was very, for his time, it was very progressive. That's why I said provocative. Like, it was not something that was happening. But the way that he wrote it was just like
a little condescending.
It's condescending.
I know. I've been talked down to by officers.
Yeah. Well, I've been talked down to by officers, and I'm not.
Yeah, but not because you have chest. not because you have boobs, right?
Yeah.
My ovaries make it hard for me to think. Did you know that?
They do. They really do.
They're distracting.
We've now gone way off the rails, Molly.
As always.
Well, I hope I never made you feel like that. But
no. If anything, I feel like there are some group of I am extra. I know this, and my extraness makes people uncomfortable. And I don't know if it's just because I'm super chatty, or if it's just because they want to get away from me. And I always got that you either wanted to flee when we were in conversations because I was chatty or I'm extra. Either way, I didn't take it personal. I was used to it.
That's how Molly rolls.
In all honesty, in hindsight, it was probably just because I had like a million other things to do.
Always. You were super busy.
He's sitting there going, Molly, I have stuff to do. Stop talking to me. Well, anyway, I don't have anything else. Anybody else? We're getting long here.
No, that was everything that I wanted to talk about. No, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to read my book recommendation and talk about it too.
Of course.
And, get your perspective.
Well, we appreciate you coming on the pod, doing this with us.
I know, and having us on yours. That was
That's
really
amazing.
It is. We're really excited, and we'll have to do it again.
Yeah, and you've been doing your pod much longer than us. This is only our second season 2.
But maybe we'll do an Isaac thing. As much as that scares April, maybe we do an Isaac thing.
Isaac, I do not want to build a tide
I pick
pool.
a project for you. No, but you already have the koi pond. Like.
or you pick a project for us. April does the research, and I actually attempt it.
Okay, I'm down for that. April is a researcher. I can do that. I'll research it and make Tom do it.
This is an executive body. April's an indoor cat.
I'm not a cat. I'm very much a dog. I'm not a cat.
No, April's an indoor toy. Yes.
All right. Anyway, well, I want to say for our listeners, next week we are covering this book. They both die at the end, and that would just be Molly and me. No Isaac anymore. Sadly,
I couldn't tell in the video what the book was. What was the?
It's called "They Both Die at the End."
They both die at the end.
Oh, I thought you were just giving us a spoiler alert. I couldn't actually.
No, I actually haven't read it yet, so I can't give you a spoiler alert. But I'm guessing that they both die at the end.
There is a good possibility of it.
Like, shocking twist, they actually don't.
What twist? This book was recommended to me by my friend Megan. Shout out to Megan. And she told me this book will destroy me, so I'm looking forward to that.
No, I don't want that right now.
Sorry. That's where we are. That's where we live.
Yeah, sorry.
Welcome to
Poor
2022.
Molly. Welcome to 2022. You don't get to pick a single book in the first month, and you're going to cry.
Hey,
thanks, April.
That was not my fault. That was not my fault. I'm sorry about that. All right. Anyway, Isaac, do you have anything you need to tell your listeners?
Nope. That's I'm all set. We made it through some great discussion about 2 books, and right. So we're going to release this on both podcasts. So Book Besties and Master of None, and maybe we'll do another crossover later where you guys get to do a project instead of me having to read a book.
Sounds terrible.
I can tell you
do it though. I will do it though. I promise. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on Book Besties with special guest Isaac Gordon of Master of None. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The views discussed here are those of Molly, April, and Isaac, not those of anyone else. Today's book was Starship Troopers by Robert A. Heinlein. Your book besties are Molly Biggs, April Watkins. Editing by Thomas Watkins. And music is Sleep Sweetly by Prigida. Don't forget to follow Book Besties on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. If you'd like to contact the Book Besties, please email us at bookbestiespod@gmail.com.